Hi there, this is Soldier Ronan from Soldier Ronan Films, and welcome to our random review. Today's random review is The Vampire's Ghost from 1945, directed by Leslie Salander, who's another one of these jobbing directors who did lots of westerns and action films. This is part of Imprint's Silver Screams cinema, which is a load of old Republic films from the mid-40s, which has since been bought over by Paramount. But Republic mainly did westerns and action films, but they dabbled a little bit in horror for a brief period. And because they didn't really do a lot of horror films, it meant some of the rules and mythos of horror films just went out the window, and they made their own kind of rules. And The Vampire's Ghost is a fascinating little film. I say little film because it's only 59 minutes long, but it packs so many interesting ideas in those 59 minutes that puts rather a lot of other vampire films to shame. I'll do a quick overview of the Silver Screams cinema box. This is 6 films on 3 Blu-rays, but it's actually 7 films. The Phantom Speaks, which is a lovely kind of... a doctor goes to death row because he thinks he can bring back a human being after death, and does so, and then the killer takes over the doctor's body and takes revenge on people, which is quite fantastic. Then you have The Vampire's Ghost, but as a special feature on that disc you get The Lady and the Monster from 1944, which is arguably the first version of Donovan's Brain, and it stars Erich von Stroheim as the crazy doctor. So I mean, you get Erich von Stroheim film as a bonus feature. Return of the Ape Man, Valley of the Zombies, She-Devil and the Unknown Terror. Now I haven't watched discs 2 and 3 yet, but I just kind of had to do a video on Vampire's Ghost because it is absolutely fantastic, even although it's only 59 minutes. All these films have commentaries, some by Kim Newman and Stephen Jones, and again you get the kind of information on the insides, and then they do the wonderful artwork on the outside. Now, The Vampire's Ghost is set in Africa, so obviously there's colonialism stuff in it. You know, the Africans who work on the plantation for the White Devil slave masters. But if you get past that, this is essentially kind of Casablanca crossed with I Walked with a Zombie, but it's got a vampire in it. And if you were told that it's actually a Jacques Tourneur film, you wouldn't actually be that surprised. It has some beautiful shots in it. The black and white cinematography is really good, and again, for a film that's only 59 minutes long, it feels longer, but in a good way. So we're introduced to the obvious bland white hero who looks a bit like Buster Crabbe, but it's not Buster Crabbe. And he is a romance with pretty much the only white girl in the plantation, whose father runs the plantation. You also have a priest, which is one of the more unusual priests because it's obviously an actor who's used to playing gangsters and heavies and probably boxers in boxing pictures, but he's playing a priest, so he has an oddness to him. Obviously there's lots of stuff about jungle drums. You know, at one point the father says to the priest, "There's been more trouble," and the priest says, "Yes, I heard it on the drums." So the priest's a little odd, and then we're introduced to this character called Fallon, who at one point in the film somebody says, "Fallon, oh, that means stranger in Irish." But in actual fact, if you kind of Google the name Fallon, it actually means leader or coming from superiority, which kind of works both ways for this film. And Fallon, played by John Abbott, is very much like Rick from Casablanca. He runs this bar, entertainment place, park casino for the local sailors who gamble and get into fights all the time, as sailors do. But he is not your prototypical vampire. He is not Christopher Lee. He's a very kind of nerdy looking guy. He's very unassuming. He has confidence. He can, there's a bar fight which he breaks up by staring into the main assailant's eyes. It's quite funny because the hero is on the floor at this point, been knocked down, and the assailant has a knife, and Fallon stares into his eyes and he drops the knife. But it is quite funny because he probably would have dropped it straight onto the hero, but obviously he didn't in the film. He has a dancing girl who's obviously in love with him, but he's not that interested. He's more interested in Julie, the fiancée of the hero, and people have been murdered and drained of blood in the past few months, and have 2 bite marks round about there on their neck. And obviously the locals, with their voodoo and their superstition, they think it's a vampire. They go out to try and find what's going on, and Fallon goes with them, because again, this is full of wonderful little ideas and differences in the vampire mythos, probably because the people who wrote it had never seen vampire movies before. But again, that gives it a sense of freedom, and rather than being kind of these strict rules, as if vampires actually exist. Just emotional vampires exist, obviously. So it's things like Fallon can go out in the sun. He just wears sunglasses. The wonderful scene where he meets the priest for the first time, and the priest just has a cross hanging around his waist, and Fallon just kind of gently backs off from him. There's no histrionics. He just kind of backs off from him and has to go and sit down, and of course the priest is like, all right, and Fallon's just like, no, it's okay, you just sit over there. So again, it's just, there's no kind of changing into animals or bats. It's very grounded. He just needs to put on sunglasses to go out in daylight, which might have been the first example of vampires not actually being afraid of daylight or daylight killing them. But they go on this road trip to try and find out what's been happening, and there's a booby trap of a rifle which shoots one of the workers that was standing behind Fallon, but not Fallon, and the workers are kind of confused about this, and they sneak into his tent and see that there's actually bullet holes in and out of his shirt. So they're immediately suspicious. Instead of a coffin, he carries around a little box with some earth from his coffin, which is dated 1883. So instead of having to lug around a coffin wherever he goes, he's just got this little trinket, which is again a nice little touch. And during this trip, the workers say the only way to kill him is to put a spear dipped in silver in the shape of a cross through him, which they do. But then he hypnotises the hero to take him and his little box of earth up to the mountain top, where he'll wait for the moonlight, which is again a beautiful little scene, and that rejuvenates him and brings him back from the dead, even though he's already dead. And then he puts the hero in a trance so he won't tell anybody, and he gets a fever, so anytime he actually wants to tell people that Fallon's actually the vampire, he just has a fever which just knocks him out for weeks. Up until this point, so Fallon can actually get to know the hero's fiance a little bit more. There's a side plot with the dancing girl and the sailor that Fallon, who seems to have lots of luck, took him for lots of money. So there's a lot of things going on, and it's only 59 minutes long. It's a shining example to filmmakers who take 2.5 hours to tell a story. You don't need 2.5 hours. You could actually argue like this film should have been longer, because it is a really interesting look at the vampire mythos. And again, it looks fantastic, and then by the time the hero has kind of snapped out of it, Fallon, who's kind of at this point all the natives and all the tribes are banging on their drums saying Fallon's the vampire. So the father who owns the plantation, who obviously doesn't believe it, just tells Fallon you should really go away from the town until the whole thing blows over. You know, you're not the problem, but that'll give you some time for things to cool down and you can come back. But he puts Julie, the fiance, in a trance and takes her to this abandoned village which has the Temple of Death. Indiana Jones isn't there, but it's the Temple of Death, or the holiest of holies, as Fallon describes it. And in the moonlight, when the moon comes out, he's going to bite Julie so she will become eternal as well. It's just a wonderful little film. Again, because Republic didn't do horror films at all, pretty much, save from these few that are in this set, the rules just don't apply, and they just make up their own rules, but they're really interesting and fun and just a completely different take. You know, as I say, like, not really scared of daylight, just need to put some sunglasses on. And again, Crossy's just a little bit nervous around priests, aren't we all? And again, John Abbott, not an imposing figure, not this 6'5" character, just this ordinary looking guy, even though when he does his trance, puts people in a trance, his eyes do go very wide and, you know, trance-like, but not a physically imposing vampire, which again makes it really interesting and unique. Yeah, again, a film that might go straight into my top 10 vampire films of all time, just because it's so unusual, just because it plays with the mythos and the rules, probably because it just doesn't know them. And it's just a wonderful way to spend 59 minutes, and it's just an absolute blast. So thanks very much for watching this pretty random review of The Vampire's Ghost. I should say at no point does a ghost appear belonging to a vampire or anybody else. It's just one of those titles that must have sounded better than just saying The Vampire or The Vampire in Africa. But please let me know if you've seen The Vampire's Ghost and what you think of it. And hopefully join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitude Ronan from Solitude Ronan Films, saying cheerio.